I wrote a book. It's called Finding Dad from Love Child to Daughter because that was my story. When I was 17 years old, I found my father, and he happened to be the governor of Rhode Island. And his name's Bruce Sundlun. And I'll tell you a little bit about the story and the lessons that I've learned from it. But the reason that I wrote the book 20 years later, after we were a huge media story, maybe some of you will remember it was covered on the nightly news, in the New York Times, People magazine. The big water cooler talk of the day was that a sitting governor had a quote-unquote love child that no one knew about. And my father ended up making a lot of wrongs right. And what I learned is that fairy tales aren't real, but forgiveness is truly magical. And that's why I wrote the book, because my father and I had a really special relationship, and I got to know him 1 year longer than I didn't know him. I grew up without him. My mom was a courageous, devoted single mom, but he ultimately made the right choice, and because of that, because of my decision to forgive and him righting some wrongs, just shared a wonderful Thanksgiving, where the Sundlun family Thanksgiving has always been a big tradition on my father's side, and who would have thought 20 years ago that the Sundlun family Thanksgiving is now held at my house. The book has been my practice, my therapy, and my journey for the last couple of years. My father was a World War II bomber pilot, and we lost him 3 years ago at the age of 91. But it was really a special story. In fact, it ends with when he did pass. I was very blessed that I got to be with him. He died in my arms with all of us surrounding him. And it was really a journey that I think the two of us became better people for taking. So it all centers around empowerment. And empowerment is something that I've been thinking about a lot as I took this journey to write my memoir. It's about the journey to find yourself, and I mean the self with a capital S. And I feel like you guys on this side of the hill, you know a lot about that, because some people, it takes a lifetime to get to that point where they really feel like they found out who they are. And some of you are lucky enough to be there now, and others of you are still figuring out what you want to do when you grow up. Raise your hand if you still feel like that. Awesome! That makes me feel so much better. I love when I come to events like this and I see so many people who are living out what they would even call the best years of their life now. Do you guys feel that way? Yeah. How many of you feel that really all the tough stuff you went through was all necessary and made you better? Yeah. I call it a meant-to-be moment, because my mom and I were sleeping at a hotel that night because we had just moved. And I was never allowed to have a television in my room growing up, so this wouldn't have happened if we were at home. Somehow we fell asleep with the TV on, and I woke up at the very second. You know how news anchors are. We don't talk very long. We move on. So the very second she's doing the story, and I shook my mom and said, Mom, wake up. Is that him? And my mom answered in her scratchy, tired voice, like, oh my gosh. He must have gone back to Rhode Island, where he's from. Sigmund Freud, as I know from researching this book, tells us he can think of no need greater in childhood than the protection of a father. And that's certainly what I needed. So I made that choice. I said, go ahead, file something. And it became public. And it became the huge water cooler talk of the day, and People magazine, and everybody else was writing about it and talking about it. And that was really hard. It was hard for me. It was hard for my mom. I'd walk out my door and there'd be reporters out there asking for my baby picture. Funny that I'm now on the other side of that. Even Gail's buddy Oprah was calling. And as much as I really, really wanted to meet her, we ultimately shut all of that down because something miraculous happened. My dad said, listen, I'm going to do the right thing here. I'm going to help pay for your college education, but I want you to come live with me. You have to come move in with me. How else am I going to get to know you? And so I did. And I followed that inner voice that had always been telling me everything's going to be okay, even when it looked like it was not going to be okay. There were times where it looked like, people are going, well, you should throw in the towel. He's clearly not responding. Or my mom was, as much as she was supportive of me getting to know my father, she never really imagined it was going to turn all that it wouldn't turn into what it did. But that voice inside of me that told me to take a leap of faith was right. And I think all of you in this room are in a position to know that that inner voice inside all of us is always right. Do you agree? Right. So I was not as experienced as the rest of you to know that, but it's something that I learned from going through it. So that same part of me that told me to have faith also demanded that I forgive my father from all of the pain and rejection and anger that he had caused my mother and me. So when I showed up on his doorstep with my bags and crossed the threshold of my new life, I knew that I would have to choose to forgive him if I wanted the happy ending that my soul had been promising for so long. But we healed in moments through humor, like the time he obliged a woman on the campaign trail who said, I want you to kiss, will you kiss my baby? And he did. And then threw his arm around me and said, have you met my new baby? And I laughed, because what can you do when life throws you a curveball, when your family situation isn't perfect, when you want to heal something, but there's a lot of cracks to be filled in? Humor is one of the best things that you have at your disposal. So we laughed. And we also ate a lot of chocolate. My dad and I learned that there's where it came from. Those of you who watch Better Connecticut know I have a chocolate addiction. And when I met my father, I learned it was genetic. That's where it came from. He was famous for people would send Oreos to the State House. And we would have those Oreos together every night after a long day at work, because he didn't let me sit home. He thought, you're not going to sit on the beaches of Newport and lollygag all summer. You're going to come with me and go to work and learn something. So I went to veterans potlucks, christenings of submarines, cabinet meetings. Wherever he went, I went and just took notes in the back room and promised to lead, follow, or get out of the way. But those cracks of abandonment that I felt, that so many kids who are growing up without a father felt, started to fill in with that amazing force that the protection of a father can give you. And because he wanted to make it right. And I tell the story in Finding Dad today because this is an epidemic in our country now. Fatherlessness has now reached a point where 27 million, or about 1 out of every 4 kids, is living in a house growing up without a father. And that's staggering. And in some communities, it's greater. It's 43%, 50%. And some of them have little to no connection to their dads. So that's a whole lot of people that are feeling disjointed, that have one parent who's not valuing them. So how can you create a prosperous, confident American society when we have this problem? It's gotten to the point that our own fatherless president has now created a White House task force on fatherlessness. I tell my story because I hear when I go out and speak, whether it be grandparents like you are telling me stories about their own kids, or young children in schools who are saying, I want to connect, I need to connect, that it's never too late. What I went through with my father, whether it be your father or another broken relationship in your life, I learned that with the power of forgiveness, when you choose to let it go, it's not about condoning what someone else did. It's not even about the other person. It's about letting it go. The wisdom that we pass down to the next generation isn't about the resumes or the job hunting or the how to make money. That's all great and it's all important, but really the wisdom I think that you guys have to pass down and that I'm looking for as I teach my children is that wisdom that really comes from your heart, and that heart becomes more and more seasoned. You learn that when you're shot down and you're the only one to escape and you've got to hide and steal bicycles and basically hidden Catholic churches, that's how he made it out. The priest would keep sending him on. He learned to get hard. He learned to get tough. He learned to value strength and become a legendary fighter. But it wasn't until a daughter came into his life that he learned to soften and relearn that lesson that what was in his heart, which was always there, is a really valuable part of him. And I think he became a better father and a better grandfather and all of that in his later years because he realized that connection to his heart and to his family was really the most valuable thing that he had in his life, despite the millions of dollars he had made or the titles he had attained. He would tell you that as we all hugged him and watched him cross over, it was the family that was the most important to him. And so that was a moment when I was on that field where I realized, now I understand maybe why when I first showed up in your life, you didn't know how to deal with having a daughter that no one knew about. And it doesn't mean what he did was right, but it means that I can understand and I have compassion. And I think as I've gone through life and I tell other people's stories, I'm always putting myself in that person's shoes so that I can tell the story better. Because I think when we can understand someone, not only can we heal our broken parts, but we come with greater wisdom. So my own life story, I think all of ours often was the template for a lot of the great lessons that I learned and that I'm still learning. So I consider it a gift to host a show like Better Connecticut and to talk about what makes life better. And a lot of that perspective comes from things I've been through, but more often than not, it's from hearing someone else's story and understanding how they made life better. So with that, I'm going to open it up to some Q&A, and I'm happy to answer anything.